Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. Yesterday, we talked about the NLDS roster. I broke down what would happen after the Charlie Morton injury, and we both said, and I don't even think there was much of a question about whether Bryce Elder would be that third guy. Now I have questions. I'll admit it. You look at how he performed last night, 3.2 innings. He only made it 3.2 innings the last time out. He's walking guys. If you look at his last 14 starts, he has a 5.75 ERA. It's clear that, listen, maybe he's running out of gas. I mean, this is the most innings he's ever pitched. Maybe it's regression. Maybe he's just going through a learning curve and needs to figure it out. I think all of those things can be true. But the question is, can you trust him in a game 3 environment, which is going to be on the road, and that could be against Arizona or it could be against Philly, but you're still throwing him out there on the road when he's never made a postseason start and he's struggling. He'll have one more start. Maybe he looks better and that changes the mind. But if you're asking me where I'm leaning today, as of right now, I think it has to be bullpen game. And when I say bullpen game, that could mean Kyle Wright going 3 or 4 innings to start the game. It could mean Jesse Chavez, Michael Tonkin, Jackson Stevens. It could be any combination of things. But I think it's going to be more of a hodgepodge of individuals rather than Bryce Elder. And it could be Bryce Elder for 2 innings. It could be Bryce Elder for 3 innings. I think that is the only logical solution, waking up today, that the Braves could go. And then some of it might have to do with, hey, if the Braves go and win games 1 and 2, maybe they do throw Elder out there for game 3 because you have a 2-0 series lead. Maybe he can give you 6-7 innings. You can keep your bullpen rested, whatever. So I think it's going to be situation based. But if it's a 1-1 series and you're going into game 3, I don't know how you send Bryce Elder to start unless he looks way better in his final start of the season.
Yeah, I think the last point you made is right. The situational base. To me, if I had to just throw it out there, Bryce Elder starting game 3, and it has nothing to do with his performance last night or the second half of the season or since the All-Star break, because like you said, 5.9 something ERA. It's been anything but good. But that's just, to me, that's just not how Brian Snitker operates. He operates under the assumption of, we're going to trust our guys. He's shown us enough. He deserves this chance. And that might not be the right call, but it's the call that I think Brian Snitker is going to make. And I do think that, what happens in game 1 and game 2 matters a lot. Let's just say Max Fried and Spencer Strider, get hit up early. We use a lot of the bullpen. They're going to Bryce Elder. Now, if they don't, Max Fried, Spencer Strider both give you 6 innings. We only use our high leverage guys, our set 7, 8, 9 guys. They're going to let Bryce Elder go until, he starts to run into a bit of trouble, in my opinion. I think he's getting the start no matter what, but I think that game 1 and game 2 will dictate a lot about how short or long his leash is in game 3. But like I said, and I've said this from the beginning, it was only reaffirmed last night. Largest comeback of the season against the Cubs last night, capped it off, striking out Dansby Swanson. This offense is historically good. It's good enough to carry this pitching staff without Charlie Morton to the promised land. It's absolutely good. It showed you that last night. Down 6 runs, they were never out of it. They went on to score 7 straight runs, win the game.
Yeah, I mean, here's the reason why I disagree, and I don't think it'll be Bryce Elder, especially if it's a 1-1 game, because you talk about guys being used in games 1 and 2. Here's the thing. You're going to have 7 days of rest going up into the NLDS. Then, as we've talked about this schedule, you have a rest day after game 1. You have a rest day after game 2. You have a rest day after game 4. There's 3 days of rest in between there. So the bullpen should be fresh the entire series for both teams. So if they have to go multiple innings, that's not something that I think is going to be too much of a concern. If they have to pitch in games 1 and 2, I don't think it's going to be too much of a concern because you have so many rest days in this series, particularly in those first 3 games where you have 7 days before, then you have a rest day after game 1 and a rest day after game 2. So I think the bullpen's going to be fresh regardless, whether they have to pitch a lot in games 1 and 2 or not. And I think if it's a 1-1 series, I don't think there's any way they toss Bryce, especially if you're playing in Philadelphia. I see no way that they toss Bryce Elder there to start a game in Philadelphia in a 1-1 series game. I think they're gonna go with Jesse Chavez probably. I don't even think they would go with Kyle Wright. I think they'd probably go with an opener like Jesse Chavez, who's a veteran, who's shown that he can pitch in big moments. I think they'd go with something like that, try to get 2 innings there, then maybe go to Tonkin, then maybe go to Jackson Stevens, then maybe go to Kyle Wright. I think they try to give it to whoever they know that can withstand that wave that is going to be occurring on the road in a Game 3 tied baseball game. The only way I actually see Bryce Elder starting, and this changes if Bryce Elder pitches very well in his final start of the season, if he even has a final start of the season. But the only way I see him really being used is if the Braves are up 2-0 and you feel confident just saying, hey, hopefully Bryce Elder can look his best. Because the simple fact is he has been very bad for 14 starts. And you can't ignore that and just be like, oh, we hope this guy does it on the biggest stage. You can have a bullpen game. There's plenty of days of rest. So I would be pretty surprised if they went in a 1-1 series game. They're going to put their best foot forward. It's not going to be about loyalty. None of that stuff's going to go into play. They're going to go out there and try to win the game, especially if it's a 1-1 game.
It has nothing to do with loyalty. I'm just telling you from what I've seen, what I think, what I've seen Snit do, and it's not has anything to do with the regular season. It has just who he is as a manager, who he is as a guy. And I do appreciate you saying that about Kyle Wright because to me, there is a chance that what you just said, maybe Jesse Chavez, Tonkin, whoever might start Game 3 in place of Bryce Elder, it will absolutely not be Kyle Wright. That is the point I'm trying to make. And I still think Game 3, regardless of what happens in Game 1 and Game 2, Bryce Elder's getting Game 3. What I think dictates Game 3 is what happens in Game 1 and Game 2 in terms of like how long his leash is really going to be. Like you said, if they're up 2-0 and Bryce Elder gives up 3, 4, 5 runs, they're going to let him maybe try and figure it out, maybe pull him quick to, because we just showed that we can come back from that. And I know playoff baseball is a little bit different than that, but still the Cubs are fighting for their lives. They were trying to win that game. But I just think it has everything to do with the whole body of work. And I know he hasn't been good of late. But I just think Snit leans on the whole body of work. He's shown this, and I get, he hasn't pitched this much. He's pitched a whole season worth of innings, which he's never done. Maybe he is fatigued. I don't know if he is fatigued. He probably shouldn't start another game in the regular season. But I just think it's honestly a foregone conclusion. He's starting Game 3. Just an opinion from what Snicker's done in the past. That's really it. But it's definitely, let's just say that I'm not right about that. It will not be Kyle Wright. It will not be Kyle Wright.
I'm not as anti-Kyle Wright as you. I think there's situations where they could roll with Kyle Wright. They could view Kyle Wright as, hey, maybe he has a good start in the NLDS, especially if you're up 2-0. Maybe he has a good start in the NLDS, and you can use him in the NLCS as your fourth starter because these conversations change in the NLCS. There's not going to be as many rest days. You're going to need 4 starters in the NLCS. So you're going to need a guy like Bryce Elder. You're going to need a guy like Kyle Wright. And you're hoping that Charlie Morton comes back. You might need both of them. So there's a lot of things. I will say, I felt this way about going in a bullpen game in 2020 NLCS. The only difference is that in the 2020 NLCS, you were playing back-to-back games. There were no rest days because it was that weird COVID schedule. So they didn't have any rest days. There were no travel days. So going to a bullpen game was a lot more difficult because it would have put a lot more strain on your bullpen. And they went with Bryce Wilson. Bryce Wilson, not a great pitcher, shoved in that game, beat Clayton Kershaw, had probably the best performance of his entire career. Actually, definitely the best performance on the entire career in the biggest stage. But I think the difference between that moment, which would be a very similar situation to going with Bryce Elder in Game 3 no matter what, is that you have these rest days and your bullpen can be fresh. So you can feel confident going with a bullpen game, whether it's, like I said, I don't know who the right direction is. I don't know who they feel most confident in. If it was me, I really think Jesse Chavez starting that game off and settling things down, having that veteran down there who's been in the league for 20 years and has pitched in big moments and has looked fantastic this year. Hopefully he can get you 2 innings. Maybe you squeeze it 3 out of him and then you go to the next guy. That to me seems like the smartest decision. I wouldn't totally count Bryce Elder, but like I said, a lot of this is going to be determined on what happens in games 1 and 2.
Yeah, but let's just say, you're planning to get 2 innings out of Jesse Chavez. What do we just think? Bryce Elder's going to give up 8 runs in the first inning? You could say the same exact thing about Bryce Elder. If you think he's going to give up 8 runs in the first inning, he probably just shouldn't be on the playoff roster to begin with. And I do not think the Braves think that. So you could say the same exact thing for Bryce Elder. You go out there, give me 2-3 innings, and the first moment he's in trouble, yank him. Like, I think he's starting Game 3 no matter what.
Bryce Elder is going to be on the playoff roster as an option. I don't know that there's a guarantee that he pitches in any games. He's going to be on there specifically because you have to make your roster at the beginning, and we don't know what's going to happen in the first 2 games. So he's going to be on that roster as a potential option to pitch game 3. I guarantee you they won't make that decision until they lead up to the exact moment. But yes, I do think it's very possible Bryce Elder could go out there. I mean, based off what we've seen the last couple outings, especially if they're playing a powerful lineup, I mean, there's not a lot of confidence there. There is not a lot of confidence there. And I hope I'm wrong, because he might get the start, but I don't blame anyone for thinking that he shouldn't pitch. And I don't think the Braves are sitting here today knowing what they're going to do. I think it's going to be determined what happens in those first 2 games. And I think and it might even be determined already that Bryce Elder isn't going to start. But I know for a fact Bryce Elder isn't going in there for sure, the game 3 starter.
I'm going to put my hat on it. We'll see when the time comes. I'm going to put my hat on it. He's a game 3
I'm not saying he can't start. I just know that decision hasn't been made yet. That decision hasn't been made. Coming up after the break, Jake Matthews restructures his deal. We're going to talk about it.